Okay, I'm just going to introduce ourselves. I'm Suzanne Schreier. I'm Associate Director for Library Automation and Technology at the Illinois State Library. But I'm here today speaking as the Director of the Targeting Autism Forum Grant, an IMLS National Leadership Grant. And I'm here with Russ Bonanno, who is the Director of the Autism Program of Illinois. And I'm just going to go through the agenda right now. We're going to cover what is autism spectrum disorder and why should libraries care about autism. And then I'll talk about what is the Targeting Autism Project and what does the future hold for this initiative, and then share with you some online resources and some books that were quite helpful for the forums. And then there'll be time for questions and answers. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to Russ Bonanno.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Before we start talking about autism, I want to find out a little bit about you, and we're going to ask you a couple of quick polling questions. So the first question should be popping up on your screen shortly, and we're going to find out a little bit about you in terms of what type of library you're with, and give you a chance to respond to that. And it looks like the overwhelming majority of you are with a public or community library today. And then a follow-up question to try to understand the roles of the people that we have experienced participating. And it looks like we've got a good mix between administrative staff and line staff, along with some volunteers and patrons. So we've got a good mix of people here. We're going to be talking about autism spectrum disorder, and I could almost title this section Everything You Wanted to Know About Autism But Were Afraid to Ask. I'm going to give you a lot of information because the way autism presents is so unique among individuals that I believe the best way to help you deal with people on the spectrum is to really understand the spectrum. So that's what we're going to start out with. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a developmental disorder, and it really is based on the neurology. It's based on the brain. So the formal term is that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. While we don't know specific causes of autism, we do know that there's a genetic component and an environmental component. But we don't have enough information to look at genetics and diagnose, or look at genetics and predict. We just know there's some correlations coming about. And when we talk about environmental components in autism, we don't mean the environment after the child is born. It's the prenatal environment. So what happens while the fetus is in the uterus impacts future autism. And it's a spectrum disorder because every one of the issues that are attached to autism can vary significantly, from requiring lots of supports to requiring very little supports in some areas, but requiring lots of supports in other areas. So it's a unique combination of things for each individual. Autism impacts communication and social functioning most noticeably. Virtually every person that is on the spectrum will be challenged when it comes to social interaction. Autism also impacts behavior. So if we look at that combination of things, people could be verbal or nonverbal or anything in between. The social functioning piece people on the spectrum tend to have difficulty interacting with others. They don't recognize the unwritten social rules that we all take for granted in talking with other people. They miss nonverbal cues. And then when we come to behavior, the classic behavior that people associate with autism is somebody rocking back and forth. And that's a form of stimming, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But behavior also relates to interests. And people on the spectrum can have a very restricted interest and be able to talk in detail about that interest for years, like I'm going to do on autism today, and not talk about too many other things. The classic saying is, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Really, that's just a cliche to get across the concept that the presentation of autism in each individual is unique. The signs of what you see, the need for support, the challenges that that person faces vary significantly from person to person. There's wide variations in all of the different abilities that many of us take for granted. There are people with autism, for instance, who can speak like they've had 25 PhDs on a subject, and there's other people who have difficulty putting two words together. There are people on the spectrum who are intellectually challenged, and others who have unbelievably high IQs. Savants may be on the spectrum, but it would be wrong to think that all savants are on the spectrum. Behavior challenges, just general behaviors, physical abilities, and their ability to function independently as older children or adults all vary significantly. So how much is autism in our society? The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention from the federal government, released the last statistics between 2013 and 2014. And at that point, what they said was 1 in 68 children has been diagnosed with autism in this country. Anyone that's really into research can go look that information up, and you'll see what they're really saying is 8-year-olds in 2010 were diagnosed at a rate that averaged 1 in 68 of the 11 states that they were monitoring. We know that the rate really is likely to be significantly higher than that. Autism is frequently underdiagnosed. The only population study that's been done was conducted in a community in Korea, where every child in the community between a certain range of ages was evaluated by autism experts. And they found the rate there to be 1 in 38 children actually met criteria for diagnosis. But even at 1 in 68, autism is more common than childhood cancer and pediatric diabetes combined. At that rate in Illinois, there are approximately 44,000 school-age children who would be on the spectrum. We also know that autism is diagnosed 4 to 5 times more frequently in boys than girls. Don't misunderstand that, though. I am not saying 4 to 5 times as many boys and girls have autism. We're now finding out that girls present differently than what we've understood. And the rate of misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis in girls is probably very significant. So what are we going to see? Pulling together some of what I mentioned before. We look at communication. People can communicate with more than language, although we typically tend to think of language, verbal language communication. There are people who are nonverbal, and people on the spectrum especially, who are nonverbal but can communicate very well with the appropriate assistive technology or using the appropriate communicative means. Some people use pictures. Some people use computer or tablet devices. AACs is what they're known as. Some people use sign language. We've actually found that oftentimes young children who are having difficulty picking up speech can pick up sign language very, very quickly and communicate well with that because it's a visual means of communication. It bypasses the language processing part of the brain. Those who are verbal may have some unique issues themselves. They may have trouble with volume or intonation. And because of that, very often it will sound like they're angry in many cases. They don't express emotion in the volume and intonation of their speech. They may suffer from what's known as echolalia, where they repeat words or phrases that are said to them. They may talk to themselves or to no one. And that's something that I do all the time. I talk to myself. I don't think I'm on the spectrum, but that's something that some people on the spectrum may do. Part of social communication impairment may mean that they may not use gestures, or they may not understand gestures that many of us use. And they're often very concrete, very literal in what they hear. An example in a conversation is somebody might say to a child on the spectrum, "Are you pulling my leg?" when the child says something. And the child's going to look and think, "I'm on the other side of the room. How could I possibly be pulling his leg?" So very literal in what they hear. If it's raining cats and dogs and they want a pet, they might go outside to get one. And remember those restricted interests I talked about. People on the spectrum can speak virtually obsessively about their interesting topic, even if it has nothing to do with what's going on and even if nobody around them is interested in it. And they often don't edit. They're very open, blunt, and often very honest. But because of that, they may seem rude. People in the room with me will understand that when a kid comes up to me and says, "You're fat," all I can really say is, "You're right." But that's not the way we typically communicate in this society. They're going to have difficulty usually understanding slang or sarcasm or metaphors. So it's important to use short, direct phrases, especially if you're trying to give somebody direction. Somebody with autism wants to know how to find a book. Saying to them, "Go to the computer, you can look it up in the little icon that says card catalog, and then you get a number, and the numbers you can look above the computer. It'll tell you what direction to go in to find the different groups of numbers. Go to that shelf, and then the books are in numerical order." That's meaningless. They lost you right after "go to the computer." It has to be one step at a time, short phrases. They may need time to process what you're saying. You can ask a question, and you may think it wasn't heard, but in fact, they're processing your question and then processing the answer to give you. It could be seconds, almost minutes, before you get an answer sometimes. You need to give people time to respond. They may need things repeated or clarified. I would say that when people don't understand something you've said, it doesn't help to say it slower and more loudly. It usually means come up with a different way of saying it. Use different words, shorten what you're saying. Remember I said they might not get the concept of gestures. Nonverbal language that we use is missed very often. So some gestures could be perceived by a person on the spectrum as being threatening and make them feel uncomfortable. And their communication might not be language. Just like people can come in and speak a different language than English, people with autism might not speak a verbal language at all, and we need to be able to find out how they communicate. So there's different ways people without language communicate. One of the things that lots of children are taught early on, and there are some adults with autism who are still using this method, is something called PECS, the Picture Exchange Communication System. And there's a picture of a large card with lots of pictures on it. That's not really the right way of PECS being done. What some people do is they have this page or paper that has lots of pictures, and they'll point to different pictures and communicate that way. Really, communication is an exchange. Although this is one way here today for me, normal social communication is I say something, you say something. So we're exchanging back and forth. And in PECS, if I want an apple, for instance, I would hand you a picture of an apple, and then you would hand me back an apple. And that's the exchange. They may have learned ASL, as I mentioned earlier. They may need an augmentative or assistive communication device. And those are often tablet-type computers that are used for a variety of things in addition to communication. They may also use their phones. Smartphones can work just as well. And the use of this type of communication bypasses the need for verbal processing. We respond to vision more quickly than we respond to verbal words or even written words. People with autism often don't make eye contact or don't make it well. And because eye contact is so important in our society, we very often focus on teaching young children the importance of eye contact. We found with research, we really don't look people in the eye when we talk to them, but in fact, we're scanning their face. We're scanning the area around the eyes. But it's hard to teach a child that. So we say, look at me, and they look in your eyes and they learn that's what they're supposed to do, so they know they have to look you in the eye when they talk to you. They don't know why, and they don't know how to not stare. So you end up getting these complaints that somebody is giving them the stalker stare, and it feels very uncomfortable. That's important to realize because people with autism not only might be difficult for you to work with, but could create problems with other patrons in the library who don't understand. People with autism often have sensory issues. Very common is being overly sensitive or highly sensitive to sound. And that actually, in many cases, is sound that we may not even hear. How many of you realize that fluorescent lights give off noise? I mentioned in a training recently, because I'm hearing impaired and I wear a hearing aid, the fan from the projector with my slides, which happened to be right over my head, was driving me crazy because my hearing aid was amplifying the fan. So some people with autism, if they start hearing too much distracting noise or extraneous noise, may put their fingers in their ears. They may cover their ears up. Some kids, it's so bothersome, they actually wear ear muffs, like the hearing protection that you wear on a gun range. And they'll wear that all the time. Doesn't mean they're not listening or they're trying to block you out. It means they're trying to control everything that they hear. The self-stimulatory behavior that I talked about is pretty common, and we think of this rocking back and forth as the classic one, but they may twirl or spin objects, do things that can be distracting to other people. It's a behavior that is relaxing in many cases, that helps a person on the spectrum feel comfortable. And if you think about it, many of us do this too, and we don't realize it. How many of us crack our knuckles, flex our wrists, tap our foot, or tap a pencil on the table? That's the same type of behavior. They may be fascinated by shiny objects and by light so that they're easily distracted. Touch may be something that's painful to a person, physically painful, even a light touch, or they may need touch to feel more comfortable. It runs in all directions at all levels, and they may have a very high tolerance to pain. I won't say have an arm falling off and not know it, but things that look like they should be very painful, a person with autism may not even know. Some people with autism look like they're obsessive or compulsive. Some of them actually meet criteria for a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder. But even without that, there are things that you may see that make you wonder. The need to rearrange objects so that they're lined up by size or lined up by color, or just even lined up so the bottoms are all equal or the tops are all equal. They may stare for a long time at a display you have set up. They may not have a concept of this idea of the process of borrowing something from the library. They know you go to the library and you find something you want, you get to take it home for a while. Well, that may be exactly what they do. without stopping at the checkout desk. And many public buildings or events require that you run your bag through a metal detector. Most of us know that that's a pretty quick and temporary thing. You run it through the detector and you get it handed back on the other end. Well, people with autism can become very attached to objects. One of those objects could be their backpack or their purse, and they may not want to give it up, even for that brief run through the metal detector. The other thing that we see in people with autism very often is that they can make what's known as perfect victims. Because they don't have a good social understanding and they take things literally at face value, it makes it very easy for people often to get somebody with autism to do something that they may not really want to do or may not be right. When I work with police officers and training them, I talk about how somebody might say, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you take this bag that just happens to have drugs in it and bring it to my friend on the next block and drop it off there for him? So suddenly this person is running drugs, has no concept of that. They think they're just doing a friend a favor. And people can reward this behavior that makes them an outcast or gets them in trouble. It's important in that they're very often bullied. And if they lose patience with the bully and explode, the person who ends up getting blamed very often is the person with autism because they don't know how to protect themselves. The bully gets away with it.
And so now the question becomes, well, why should any of this matter to libraries? Why should autism spectrum disorder be an issue for librarians? And as Russ was talking about the large population of residents who have been diagnosed, actually that 1 in 68 translates to more than 3.5 million Americans have been diagnosed with autism. But the impact doesn't stop there. The impact is much greater because all of those people have families that care about them, that need to find good information and resources so that they can get them the accommodations and the help that they need. And as Russ mentioned earlier, there's also a significant population of people that are on the autism spectrum but don't have any kind of medical diagnosis. But everybody knows that they're on the spectrum and they're equally challenged, and those are not included in this 3.5 million. So libraries need to be concerned about this population because these are people that libraries are supposed to be serving. In terms of the mission, certainly of public libraries, is to be open, inclusive of the wide variety of people that exist in their communities. And this is a community that needs library services. There's so much information out there. Where does a parent who just has had his kid diagnosed, how do they find the right information? The information that's trustworthy and accurate and current, and how do they find access to local services? Libraries can really facilitate this. Libraries are also the heart of community, and there's been a great deal written in the last few years about libraries, public libraries specifically, becoming community hubs. And libraries are trying to reinvent themselves, are looking for ways to introduce programming and get the community in there. And they need to also make sure that if they're reaching out to everybody, they're not ignoring those on the spectrum. They need to be welcoming to all ages. They increase the quality of people's lives. In addition to offering information resources, libraries offer places to relax, to collaborate on school projects, to discuss books, to even play games, to find resources on resume writing, taking the GED. And So we just want to make sure that all these wonderful services are services that are made available, that the libraries are welcoming to this large population. ASD is a challenge for libraries because the disabilities are referred to as invisible. So it's very hard to detect. You know, does someone coming in who's being very frustrated and exhibiting some unusual behavior, is that a dangerous person, or is it someone on the spectrum? These are all things that can be taught. People can be made aware and really taught to respond in more appropriate and more welcoming ways. And then finally, it should matter to libraries because it is part of the American Disabilities Act, which, happy anniversary, 25 years. In Title III under public accommodations, it says here, public accommodations must make reasonable modifications in policies, practices, and procedures that deny equal access to individuals with disabilities unless a fundamental alteration would result in the nature of the goods and services provided.
And we're going to ask you a question because we've talked a lot about how common autism is. So we're going to ask a quick question of you to find out how many of you have connections with somebody in your personal life who has autism. And getting the results, and about 3/4 of you have answered that you have a connection in your personal lives with someone with autism. You are representative of the public at large. It really gives you a concept of how common this is.
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to throw in a quote after that from Andrew Solomon, his book Far From the Tree, where he says, that difference unites us. The exceptional is ubiquitous. To be entirely typical is a rare and lonely state. So what are the challenges for libraries in terms of reaching out to this public? And one huge challenge is overcoming the perception that libraries are unwelcoming to residents with autism. And those perceptions we found exist. There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence of stories of people. In fact, I'm going to quote a couple of folks who participated in the Targeting Autism Forum. So some of them have had some really bad experiences and have never returned to the library. Others have not had a bad experience, but just assumed that the library wouldn't be a welcoming place for their kid who is prone to having temper tantrums and prone to acting inappropriately. They're just afraid. So libraries really need to do more of a better job of reaching out to the public and saying, hey, it's okay, you're welcome here, we understand. And then I want to quote a parent that attended one of the Targeting Autism forums last March, the first one we had, and I thought this was particularly poignant. She says, and I'm not going to give you any names or libraries, so nobody's going to be embarrassed here, but quote, one of the most unpleasant experiences was being banned from my local public library. As an avid reader and a movie enthusiast, my son loves the local library and all that it has to offer. Yet, the library has consistently been a place in which he has felt scolded, rejected, and humiliated. The problems in the library seem to stem from the library staff's misunderstanding of my son's intentions, enthusiasm, personality, and disability. It takes a village to raise a child with a disability. Unfortunately for us, the library was not part of that village. So, I mean, that's very sad. I mean, some of these kids are really perfect. They're great library users. They should be in the libraries more. Another forum participant reported that after attending a community stakeholder meeting on autism in libraries, she says, last night's meeting was enlightening and heartbreaking. I did not hear any uplifting stories on how libraries made a positive difference in anyone's life who is affected with ASD. Instead, my heart went out to the parents I talked to who were afraid to bring their children to the library because libraries are a quiet place and their children wouldn't fit in and be welcome there. Parents who are afraid to bring their child to the library are depriving themselves and their families of enriching and educational experiences in the library. As the number of diagnosed cases of ASD continue to increase each year, we have to accept that ASD is no longer an exception, but a normal situation in our communities. Really powerful. Sometimes perceptions about libraries keep people with the spectrum away. One librarian says all too often, I find my conversations with parents of a child with autism still contain the statement, oh, we don't go to the library. We don't do well in quiet places. I need to know how we can better reach these families and carry the message that the library can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So clearly libraries need to do a better job of marketing and their active inclusivity to all populations of people, including autism. Not limited to, but including. Libraries need to become more community focused, and that's a challenge because it's always a challenge to get out of your comfort zone and reach out to a group of people and to reach out to a community that you're not familiar with, and it's just hard for everyone to do that. And for the ASD community, this means that the librarians really need to go out and identify who the stakeholders are, because librarians are not experts. You know, they're not. We don't expect the library profession to be the next clinicians helping people on the spectrum. We just want to get them into the library and so they can use library services to help improve their lives. So they need to go out and figure out who they can partner with. What other groups, and there are so many groups whose jobs intersect with the population on the spectrum. When you've got this high a number, it should not be that hard to find other stakeholders. Another challenge is a perception, kind of a wall that goes up, that this isn't the job of librarians. We're not social workers. And I really want to bring this up because it's so important to convey that we're not really looking for librarians to become social workers, that there is a difference. And sometimes those lines can blur because when you work in a library and you work in public service, you're performing a social function, but that doesn't make you an expert and a social worker. We just need to make sure, again, that libraries are able to do more to actively include the community. One of them, I'm going to read you some really positive things too, because I don't want you to think that libraries are just bad about this. I mean, we hear some wonderful things too. And one of the library districts that participated in the forum was quoted as saying that in their library mission statement, they exist to ensure that the residents of the district have the right and the means to free and open access to ideas and information that's fundamental. This statement is the basis for all services that the library seeks to provide for all our patrons. And I think that's wonderful. And this is about really tying people to what their missions are. Another person said, our mission is to serve the community as a general center of information and to provide opportunity and encouragement for individuals to use our services and materials to meet their educational, personal, professional, recreational, and cultural needs. Implied in these and other mission statements is really the assertion that libraries are and should be at the heart of their community. And so by being more accommodating, more welcoming to the population on the autism spectrum, it really helps all libraries be better libraries and be better at improving the lives. We have to ask ourselves the question, because libraries have long held that part of what they do is on a day-to-day basis, they're improving the quality of people's lives. So the question that we need to add to that is, are they doing enough to improve the quality of lives for individuals and families affected by autism spectrum disorder? One librarian, I thought this was very, there's a gap in services, and particularly libraries that are in communities that are impoverished, that don't have access to the internet except in the library. It's really crucial that they're able to find these resources in the library, because they're really out on a limb. One librarian reported that in their county has a 16% poverty rate, significantly higher than the statewide average of 13.7%, or the U.S. national average of 14.9%. For many of our library patrons in the ASD community who are living in poverty, access to up-to-date print and AV resources on topics like building social skills, therapeutic and medical interventions, and other relevant topics is very limited. So, finally, it's not that librarians are social workers, but as one librarian said, if we can get a person to a social worker or to information resources that would be helpful, that would be great. So that's what we're looking to do. And then finally, the need for education and training is another challenge, because as Russ was saying, because autism expresses itself so individually from person to person, it's nuanced, and it's a learning curve. That to be inclusive, requires some education. Unlike, the libraries have been great in putting ramps in and doing things to really help accommodate people with physical disabilities, because those are a little easier to address. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. This is a bit more challenging because there's so much variety and it's hard to really recognize. It just requires being educated. It doesn't just happen by opening your doors. Did you have another question you wanted to?
I do. I want to ask another question of you here as we get ready to move on. We've said at the beginning that this is part of the Targeting Autism National Forum. And another get-to-know-you question. Curious how many of you participated in the forum that Suzanne mentioned at the beginning today. And we're getting the results here. A little more than half, it seems, no one from your institution participated, and almost 20% never even heard about it. Wow. So points out we need to do a little more marketing, and that's hopefully part of what this is today.
I just want to add a little something about why education and training is needed, because it's very easy to misinterpret and to overreact to situations. There have been lots of stories about, if a teenager or a young adult is having a meltdown in a library, especially in these times with people, with firearms coming in, there is a knee-jerk reaction when you don't understand to overreact. And in some cases, it's caused terrible trauma, where the library securities come in, even the police, and they escort people out. There have been stories we've heard where someone's been told that that she's got to be with her, 20-year-old son. She can't leave his sight as long as he's in the library, and so it's not very warm and fuzzy and welcoming. But we can change that with education. We can learn, teach librarians how to tell the difference, how, when something is not a life-threatening situation, but just a situation of somebody being frustrated, a kid perhaps who's used the library every day that week and has sat down at the same computer and comes in one day and someone else is using that computer, might have an absolute meltdown. That's understandable when you understand the autism spectrum, but if you don't, it's easy to get scared and just want to run. And then another quote I want to share with you, because I thought this was really poignant. Somebody said, right now the only way to find real information and help about ASD is simply word of mouth. And we know that there's a lot of bad information out there, so how do you navigate through this? That's not part of the quote. Back to the quote. Word from parent to parent or teacher to parent. Finding any support services is difficult if one isn't in that network. It leaves parents of the newly diagnosed completely helpless and vulnerable to much information, much misinformation. And finding information about teens transitioning to adulthood is nearly impossible. And that's another issue that needs to be covered and that we talked about in the forum. Then finally, someone said, I believe that public libraries, particularly those in disadvantaged neighborhoods, have the challenging task of serving as a first source of information for many families who may otherwise not be able to access it. Moving along. So by now I suppose I should tell you, what is targeting autism? And targeting autism was an IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services National Leadership Forum grant, which was designed to set the stage to create a forum, a national forum in Illinois, to talk about how can we get together and better serve our patrons on the autism spectrum, better serve the ones that come in, and better find the ones that we should be serving that aren't coming in. And when we started to put this together, we found that there was just a huge need. I was hearing from libraries that were calling because I had done a survey and been in touch with people, and they didn't know where to go. We have these kids coming in on this, and they're on the spectrum, and I can't, I don't know what to do for them. And we actually had to refer them to a New Jersey library project that started in 2007 to better serve those on the spectrum, and because there really wasn't a forum for libraries, and libraries didn't know about the autism program of Illinois. There's a lot of resources that are out there, wonderful resources, but it doesn't mean that that connection is made. So anyway, so we put together this forum as a way to get all these people together in one room from all over the state, and then we also had folks who came as far as California, and actually a couple people that attended from Canada and the East Coast, and but the thing that made this forum so groundbreaking was that it wasn't just librarians. We had about 80 to 90 people, and they represented libraries, all types of libraries, but they also they were educators, they were university instructors at library schools, autism services programs, non-for-profits. We had counselors, we had parents of kids. We also had self-advocates, and some of them were librarians. That's another thing. You find that there are a lot of librarians in our profession that are on the spectrum. So it seems ironic that that the libraries shouldn't be, more accommodating, because these folks are going to make great librarians. So there's so much we can do. And what was really interesting, I felt it was a very, very powerful meeting, because people were not only professionally touched by this, but they were personally touched. I have never been to a forum like this, a professional forum like this, with a group of people that felt absolutely passionate about this topic because of their children or themselves or their spouses, or I mean it goes on and on, or their great friends. And most of the majority of people in that room were personally touched, which really adds something, to your professional commitment. So it was just great. And they were just, if nothing else came from this, and we certainly hope something does, that this is a beginning, but these people were thrilled just to be able to have that experience of connecting with each other. And we heard some amazing presentations, and there were some amazing small group discussions, and the beginnings of networking. The second day was a 2-day forum, and the second day the participants were told to sit with the folks that represented the area of the state mostly that they were from, so they could begin to have some sort of regional network forming. And then we're having another forum in this next March, and they're going to come back. We're going to have a lot of wonderful speakers as well, but the main gist of it is for them to come back and tell us what they learned about their communities, what they learned about who their stakeholders are, the demographics, what they learned about what services their libraries need, if their libraries are accommodating, if their physical spaces are accommodating, if they're not, what they need to do to change those physical spaces. We're not being, we're not giving them a precise list of questions, but just things to think about and come back to and report. This is just supposed to provide the foundation for building sustainable partnerships with all kinds of organizations and families within their communities. So that's what Targeting Autism is. It's a first step in building a strong foundation to future initiatives to come.
Now, before we go to the next steps, we've got some parts that are still connected with this current grant and some of what we're doing. And one of the first things that you see on this slide for next steps is the current grant is providing the opportunity for libraries and library districts to get some on-site training if they want, or some on-site or remote consultation in trying to determine who your stakeholders are with autism, who are potential community partners, what you might be able to do.
And maybe also what books you need in your resource center.
So we're curious to see how many of you are interested in this particular offering. And so we've got a couple of polling questions about that. The first is simple, whether or not you think you and your library are interested with no cost. And I guess it was that no cost that hit you, because everybody is saying they're interested in it.
And you'll go out and visit some site visits too.
Yes. Okay. And second piece, I'm going to maybe predict the answer to this one, but whether or not you feel there is a general need, so not just those of you who are here today, but a general need to train library staff in working with people with autism. And once again, we're looking at 100% who agree with that statement. And one last one, as many of you are aware, I'm sure, there is a graduate program in library science, has a bunch of names. I'm not a library science person, so I don't know all of them. But how many of you believe that a course training on disability should be part of that graduate education? And it's looking like 100% again in that. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Suzanne. Thank you.
Well, that's super. And this is such a great opportunity. I think everybody should take advantage of, because Russ is really a jewel, and it's great resource for you. Excuse me. I wanted to alert you just to the next thing that we're going to try and do. Of course, we're going to have the next forum in March, and we'll share all that information with you as we get an agenda together. But we're also seeking an additional grant-funded project. We're submitting a preliminary proposal next week. And this is to develop a comprehensive training and education program for libraries. Whereas the forum was to just sort of see what the needs are and to understand the community and how wide the scope is, this would be to create a comprehensive program that involves in-service training, consultation, that includes speakers and programs, and all of this would be delivered both on site but also available remotely, not just through Illinois but throughout the nation. We want to make all that we create, if this gets funded, all that's created will be shared on Web Junction for everybody. And we're partnering with some really great folks. Syracuse University, who has created a wonderful website of training modules called Project Enable that isn't limited to autism. It covers all kinds of disabilities, but for this project they would be adding a series of modules that are just about autism. And we're also partnering with Dominican University, who is going to be providing programming, hosting lots of different programming throughout at Dominican, hosting it and making it available on online platforms, and also using what's developed here as a way to improve courses that they've already designed, because they already teach classes about disabilities. So we're just trying to make them a little better and create some best practices. And the intent here is that this is a holistic kind of program that should have an immediate impact on practitioners, but also will impact the library profession, preparing incoming librarians to be sensitive to these issues. So keep your fingers crossed for that. We'll let you know how that goes down. But like I said, we're submitting it next week. And then finally, I just want to share the next couple of slides are some wonderful resources that we've made available through the Targeting Autism project. And the first is, for more information about targeting autism, there's a link to our web page on our CyberDrive Illinois site. And we also have a Targeting Autism blog. And I should tell you that, and that's just really limited to any information that we can share about the Targeting Autism project. And we're also storing stories. So please, I want to put I invite you all and anyone you know who's got any stories to share about their experiences in libraries about autism in libraries. Good experiences are fine. We want to hear those. We also want to hear bad experiences, challenges, anything that has to do with autism in libraries that's a story, something you can share. Please share those. And you can get onto the blog and just post them. And then, we also have a Facebook page. And the Facebook page is a little wider in scope. That is designed so that any librarians inside Illinois, outside Illinois, can share whatever resources, insights, anything that they want to share on the topic of libraries and autism. Then the Autism Program of Illinois website.
And I want to just say a little something about that. So many of you are from community libraries, and all of you, I assume, are from Illinois, so you're well aware of the state's difficulty in coming up with a budget. The Autism Program is funded by the state through the Department of Human Services, Division of Developmental Disabilities. We have not been funded since June 30th, and we have no promise of funding for anything we've done. It is likely, barring a miracle, that our central office will shut down next week at the end of this month. The website will still be there, and the reason I'm telling you this is while if you go to the home page, the website may look dead. We have all sorts of resources available that you can link to, that we have published tip sheets, fact sheets, visual aids, blog posts that talk a lot about different things. They will all be available whether my office and I continue to function or not. They're all available to you for free download. You're welcome to print them and distribute them or make them available. So don't let the home page scare you if it looks like it hasn't changed in a while. Go to resources, check them out. It also lists all of our partners. We have partners all around the state. Some of them have stopped providing services because of the funding. Some have other funding available. So check your local partner, and they can provide you with even more resources and assistance as well if you want.
Okay, now I don't want you to worry when Russ said, whether the office and I continue to function. Russ is continuing to function. He's right here functioning. And if you go, I want to just bring another plug. If you want him to come and visit your library and set up a session, you can go to the Targeting Autism blog, and there's a whole section, I think it's the latest post I have, about setting this up. And on his name, you can just click on his name and his email address. Not the Targeting Autism Program email address, so it doesn't matter. But his personal email address will come up, so you can schedule him that way, and I encourage you to do so. Also, we're down to Libraries and Autism We're Connected was really the project that really was so inspirational to this project going, because I early on found out that a couple of little public libraries in New Jersey with a pittance of money from LSTA put together an incredible statewide program with wonderful training tools and wonderful meetings, and I think they won an award for this. This was in 2008 when, they were it. And so they were an inspiration, and which leads me to the next link, because this is a grant offering, a small grants offering that's available throughout the country. It's called Autism Welcome Here, Library Program Services and More Grant. And it's sort of in honor of one of the founders of Libraries and Autism We're Connected. And but this was, I understand that the inspiration for doing this came out of of Barbara Clipper's attendance at the Targeting Autism Forum and gave her this idea. So she, bless her heart, has generously started a grant program. So if you want to learn more about that and send a grant application in, I know that they're taking them now through December, and just go to that link, librariesandautism.org/grant. And you can find out more about that. I've already mentioned Project Enable, which is, I think, a just absolutely elegant site. And they have worked on this through many IMLS grant projects and have done an incredible job. And so I was so excited to find out that they're going to partner with us on creating autism modules for this, and that this is all going to be out on WebJunction. This is just so great. There's also another good site from Florida University serving library users on the autism spectrum, Project PALS. That's another IMLS-supported project, and that is really worth looking at. And that is currently on the WebJunction site. So we're hoping WebJunction becomes, you know, kind of like the place to go, so you won't have to look and, you know, do a myriad of Google searches. You can just go to WebJunction to find autism resources. And then I can't end without making, without saying that snails, which sometimes I have a problem with that is a label, because they're such a wonderful organization and they're not slow at all, but it stands for Special Needs and Inclusive Library Services, and it includes a consortia of, I believe, somewhere over 40 libraries up in the Chicago area, and they have been a remarkable support for each other, and they have provided so many wonderful programs and sensory story times, and they know how to work with their communities, and they're wonderful role models. So there's a lot of great things going on in the state, and we, with this initiative, are just trying to bring it together to create some coherence as a whole of all of it. And then the next slide are 3 of the sources that we gave participants at the first forum. Can't say enough wonderful things about all of these books. They're so wonderful. I read Library Services for Youth on the Autism Spectrum by Leslie Farmer when I first thought about doing this kind of project, and I was just, I couldn't put it down, and you know, that says a lot for a library resource, but there were just so many things I had never thought about, and so many incredible ways the libraries can really help this community. And so if you haven't read that, you should read that. And also, as a companion piece, another wonderful resource, Programming for Children and Teens with Autism Spectrum Disorder by Barbara Clipper, who's also in charge of that grant program I just told you about. 2 great resources, and another great resource on really helping you do community assessments. And so these are great books. I recommend that you read them all if you don't already have them. And finally, just our contact information. Again, if you want to ask me any questions about the forum, about the grant, about anything else, including even OCLC, I can talk to you about. Just kidding. No, I can, but just contact me. And again, that's Russ's Gmail account, and I would please encourage you to contact him, because he's ready to come out and see you. And it was a pleasure doing this.
Yep, thank you. And we'll take questions. I don't know if there have been questions coming in or not.
All right. Yes, I have one question, and I'll just, send a reminder out to everybody. If you do have questions for Russ and Suzanne before we wrap up, go ahead and type them in your questions box. The one that came in earlier is, do you have any suggestions of how to communicate or advertise that you are a library who welcomes families and patrons with ASD?
I think that is a great question. It's actually something Suzanne and I have been talking about, and we're looking to establish a way of recognizing libraries with this concept of being autism friendly and having something that you can post around your library demonstrating that you're autism friendly. We're trying to determine how we would recognize such libraries, not so much what we'd give you to post, but how we would know whether or not you should post it. And those of you who participate in the forum coming up and in trainings or consulting, you'll be able to give us some assistance in how to best make that determination.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions, so you must have addressed everybody's needs today. So thank you, Russ and Suzanne, for coming up and sharing your expertise and letting us know what's going on in the state. Suzanne reminded me earlier that this program was part of our partnership with ADA 25 Chicago. Rails has been celebrating the ADA this year with a series of programs. Last week we had an Autism 101 webinar that I think is a nice complement to what Russ and Suzanne presented today. And so if you missed that, we'll be posting the recording on our Rails archive page. And we have recorded today's presentation as well, and we'll post that there as soon as possible. And we do have some other programs coming up. Next month we'll be doing some mental health awareness training out at the Skokie Public Library and at the Kewanee Public Library. And in November and December, we have some webinars about inclusive programming for adults with disabilities and then also serving children with disabilities. So I am going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, Suzanne and Russ, for being here today. And
thank you. Thank you, Rails.
Yep. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.